to change things up this year from our previous focus on emergency preparedness and address this issue that's also of a good concern for special districts, the resilience. So without further ado, Frank, I'll turn it over to you and we'll get this great day of education started. Thanks, everyone.
Megan, thank you very much. We at USC appreciate your collaboration with us. Time flies, I believe. It's been at least 4 years that we've been doing this together. And I appreciate the focus because you will hear from several panels the importance of the topic. It's not only about the emergency itself, but creating organizations that are resilient. Those of you who have followed the news know very well that my city of Rolling Hills Estates not long ago suffered a major calamity of about 10 homes falling into a canyon as a result of climate change and extreme weather and creating a major landslide. And the other side of the Palos Verdes Peninsula continues to suffer from major landslides as a result of similar events. So resiliency of our organizations, whether cities or special districts, matter a lot. And today we have at least 4 panels to discuss some of these resiliency topics. I'm delighted to introduce the first one on the advanced clean fleets and a panel that actually will discuss the topic. All the bios are in your materials, so we're not going to take the time to introduce each person. Please take a look at the bios of the individuals who will be speaking today. All I would like to do at this time is to introduce the first speaker of that panel, who will be Craig Duehring, who is the engineering manager at the California Air Resources Board. Craig, if you would, the floor is yours. Please start, and I'm sure that each member of your panel will introduce themselves as they speak. Thank you very much for being here. On behalf of the University of Southern California, we appreciate you all. Thank you.
My name is Craig Duehring. I've been managing the efforts at the California Air Resources Board for the development of several medium and heavy duty regulations. More recently, the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation. I'm going to provide a little bit of a background to kind of build on what Frank talked about as far as the challenges that we face, and then I'll get right into the regulations. So, we know that California, reducing air pollution is critical to protect the health of all Californians. Today, there are nearly 2 million trucks operating in California, which is much of the air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions that comes from the transportation sector. As shown in the blue slice, you can see that the largest emitters happen to be the class 7 and 8 tractors, but they only represent about 12% of the truck population. So we're going after the entire medium and heavy duty market right now. So to address this, the state set several targets to reduce air pollution and carbon emissions with the goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. And this just shows a series of regulations that we're a suite of regulations that we're putting together. And this is what the board adopted. Starting in 2018, we have the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation. We followed that by the Zero Emission Airport Shuttle Bus Regulation. And then in 2020 and 2021, the board adopted 3 major truck regulations. We have the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation, which will ensure the supply of zero-emission trucks from all major truck manufacturers. We have the Heavy-Duty Omnibus Regulation, which will reduce criteria pollutants from internal combustion engines sold into California. And then we have the Heavy-Duty Inspection and Maintenance Regulation, which it's also known as the Clean Truck Check. This will ensure that the combustion engines that are already out there and the emission control systems that they use are maintained and repaired timely. And then in the red box, you see the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation. This is the next step, right? This is the next step in the evolution of trying to reduce emissions from medium and heavy duty trucks. We also have future regulations that are we're looking at in the near future. Just real quick, looking back in late 2022, there were about 150 zero-emission truck models available for order in all weight classes, and the market's growing. And it's growing in part because of the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. This regulation, which was approved in 2020, ensures the supply of available zero-emission vehicles will continue to grow in the upcoming years. It requires manufacturers to sell zero-emission vehicles as a growing percentage of sales in all classes. And we're not alone. California's not alone. 10 other states have joined California on the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation, with the most recent partners being Colorado and Maryland. Other states are actively considering this regulation as well. And as part of this regulation, our board established in their resolution set 100% zero emission targets, fleet targets of 2035, 2040, and 2045 for many transportation sectors. And those sectors include last mile delivery, drayage trucks, refuse trucks, utility trucks, and public fleets. So that leads me to the next the topic at hand, which is the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. This really is, this regulation has four parts to it. First is a 100% zero emission sales requirement for manufacturers. And then there are three fleet components with specific requirements on drayage trucks, local government fleets, and high priority fleets. So let me just go through those components real quick, just to give you a sense of what this regulation is. On the manufacturer side, ACF, or Advanced Clean Fleets, represents a first of its kind requirement for medium and heavy duty trucks, establishing an end to internal combustion engine sales. Per board direction, beginning in 2036, all medium and heavy duty vehicles sold into California must be zero emission. This piece of the rule is a key element for meeting the state's carbon neutrality targets and the goals laid out by the governor. This 100% requirement also sends a clear signal to the trucking market, including manufacturers, fleets, infrastructure providers, service technicians, and local governments. All right, so for state and local governments, the next component of the regulation does affect state and local governments. For these fleets, the default option is a zero emission purchase requirement that aligns with public fleet purchasing cycles. Starting in 2024, 50% of all purchases must be zero emissions. That means the other half can be combustion powered until 2027. For state and local governments, this applies to all Class B through Class 8 vehicle purchases. And that means those vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating of greater than 8,500 pounds, basically an F-250 or larger. In addition, a near zero emission vehicle, or what we call an NZEV, can qualify as a zero emission vehicle until 2035. An NZEV, a near zero emission vehicle, is a plug-in hybrid with a minimum all-electric range. As indicated in the map, agencies that are in designated counties will remain exempt from the zero emission purchase requirement until 2027. This exemption also has been granted to divisions that have 10 or fewer trucks. Just one last note here: there is a reporting requirement for state and local governments. That reporting deadline was April 1st, and just know that we are still accepting state and local government fleets to report. So if they haven't reported yet, please do so. As part of in lieu of the zero emission purchase schedule I just discussed, state and local government fleets do have a choice to comply using what we call the ZEV milestone option to phase in ZEVs based on key milestone targets. This option may offer a more flexible approach because the milestones are based on the type of trucks within the fleet. Under this option, a certain portion of the fleet needs to be composed of zero or near zero emission vehicles. As seen in the table, the requirements are more aggressive for well-suited vehicles listed in Group 1 and delayed for more specialized or longer distance vehicles in Groups 2 and 3. This phasing happens gradually over the next 2 decades. As long as the ZEV milestones are being met, fleet owners have considerable flexibility with the rest of their vehicles in the fleet. And Yeah, so let me just provide a quick example of what this might look like. So let's assume a fleet has 100 trucks. Maybe it's a larger city and it's got 100 trucks. To illustrate this, we're going to break this up. We're going to say this fleet consists of 60 Group 1 trucks, 20 Group 2 trucks, and 20 Group 3 trucks. So for 2025, they would need to have 6 ZEVs in their fleet. And this is calculated by taking the 60 Group 1 trucks, multiplying it by 10%, which gives them the 6 ZEVs. Any zero emission vehicle in that fleet would qualify for that 6 ZEV requirement. And then skipping forward to 2029, you'd have to do 2 calculations, right? You'd have to take your 60 trucks, multiply that by 25%. That would give you the 15 ZEVs. Then you'd have to take your 20 Group 2 trucks, multiply that by 10%, gives you 2 more ZEVs for a total of 17 ZEVs in the fleet. Again, it doesn't matter which vehicles are zero emission or near zero emission. Those would qualify to meet your targets, your 17 zero emission vehicle target. So that's how that works. And by the way, we do have a calculator on our website. If any fleet is interested in trying to figure this out, and they can actually enter the number of trucks by the grouping, and the calculator will provide a year-by-year analysis of their fleet. So the third component of this regulation applies to high priority and federal fleets. This portion of the regulation applies to well-capitalized businesses, well-suited for electrification. These requirements apply to any fleet of 50 or more vehicles under common ownership and control, or any fleet with greater than 50 million in revenue. It also applies to federal governments. There are additional requirements on brokers and motor carriers to ensure that they are hiring compliant fleets. So in addition to the Class 2B through 8 vehicles we previously discussed, this part of the regulation also applies to off-road yard tractors, as well as light-duty package delivery vehicles, such as those used by the post office. The default option for this for the high-priority fleets is to follow what we call the model year schedule. Starting in January 2024, fleet owners must report which trucks will be part of their California fleet. From that point forward, all additions to the fleet must be zero emission or near zero emission. And just like the state and local government fleet requirements, an NZEV, which is a plug-in hybrid, would qualify as a zero emission vehicle until 2035. And finally, businesses subject to the high priority fleets requirement have the same option as state and local governments do to use the ZEV milestone approach that I previously mentioned. And then the final component of the regulation is what we call the drayage truck requirements. And then this applies to tractors that operate at the state seaports and intermodal rail yards. This requirement will create a fully zero emission drayage fleet by 2035. So to conduct drayage operations in California, trucks must be registered in the CARB online reporting system. And then legacy combustion powered drayage trucks are required to be, legacy drayage trucks will be able to remain in in drayage service until the end of their minimum useful life, as long as they visit a seaport or intermodal yard once a year. And then beginning January 24, only zero emission trucks can be added to the registration system. And then ultimately by 2035, the entire fleet should be zero emission. So there are some, so the regulation does contain a number of provisions that the fleet owner may utilize to assist in meeting compliance. These provisions address a variety of circumstances, including zero emission vehicle availability, vehicles operating less than 1,000 miles per year, delays in infrastructure, vehicles involved in accidents, vehicles under mutual aid agreements, and waste and wastewater fleet transition, and the list goes on. More detailed information on these provisions and how to qualify for them is available on our website. So in summary, the regulation is phased in over time, right? It's phased in over the next 2 decades, and all combustion-powered vehicles are guaranteed their full useful life. This transition will not happen overnight. Both public fleets and high-priority fleets high priority fleets can use the ZEV milestone option and have the flexibility to purchase near zero emission vehicles or plug-in hybrids that have an all-electric range. Lastly, the regulation includes numerous provisions to ensure that the fleet owner would not be out of compliance for situations outside of their control. They include vehicle delivery delays, infrastructure delays, as I mentioned before, accidents, and other unforeseen events. Likewise, the regulation allows for the purchase of combustion-powered vehicles if a zero-emission vehicle is not available or does not meet the fleet's duty cycle. And just so you know that we have a reporting system that's open right now. I do have a slide that talks about infrastructure. I wanted to include this because I want everybody to understand there's a tremendous amount of coordination happening by multiple agencies, and this is at the direction of our governor. Our board is working very closely with the Energy Commission, also with the Public Utilities Commission, with Caltrans, and the governor's office. We're working hand in hand to make sure that the infrastructure is rolled out in a timely manner. And then lastly, I just want to make sure everybody is aware that we have a lot of information available on our website. So we have fact sheets. The URL is at the top. So if you have any questions about the ACF regulation, we do have a dedicated email account. It's called zevfleet@arb.ca.gov. Feel free to reach out to us. I have several staff working on that on a daily basis. And we also have a ZEV truck stop homepage, which you can see, which provides a lot of good information about funding and provide some help outside of just what focusing on the regulation itself. We also have a diesel hotline you can call if you so choose. So Megan and Frank, that is all I had, and I'll kick it back to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Craig. Craig gave a very comprehensive and nice summary of the regulation, which I have to admit was part of my, I was going to get into, but I think that's actually the really great segue because you heard from the expert directly and the people who are involved in, implementing this regulation. So I think what I'll do is kind of focus on some of the questions we've been getting from our clients and focusing less on the actual regulation, but some of that aspect and, the applicability, because a lot of the questions initially are, does this apply to my agency? We're getting some sort of questions and concerns as if like there is a blanket exemption to an agency. And and as Craig had mentioned, there are different components of this regulation. And I'm going to focus primarily on the state and local agency component and the, state and local agency fleets. So the regulation defined the state and local agency as a city, county, public utility, special district, local agency, or district or public agency of the state of California. And it even goes further. So essentially affected agencies are those that have jurisdiction in California that own, lease, or operate in one or more vehicles with a gross vehicle rating weight of 8,500 pounds. So, it's a very broad definition, and most likely your agency would fall under it. So there isn't a blanket exemption for agencies. As Craig had mentioned, there are a numerous amounts of exemptions and extensions that an agency, a local or state agency can apply for, but that's usually based off of the category of vehicles or an fleet owner request. So kind of going back, you first have to decide, does it apply to you? So it most likely will apply if you are, part of that definition. And then, as Craig mentioned, you have, two options, and what they call the purchase schedule, or you can opt into the milestone option. But again, this is where we want to talk about is that it's exemptions based on vehicles as well as your request. So there are specific categorical vehicles that are exempt that are specified in the regulation. And this is just, highlighting that aspect. And then again, there are numerous extensions or exemptions, but one thing to keep in mind is that it also is dependent on the schedule you pick. So not all exemptions or extensions are, may be available based off of your option selected. So again, like we've tried to group it together to make it a little bit easier to see. There can be exemptions that are due to delay, such as vehicle delivery or infrastructure delay. There can be extensions or exemptions when your, zero emission vehicle doesn't meet your needs. And then there are, of course, special circumstances. And so those are all things that can be utilized or looked into by a fleet owner. But keeping in mind that you still have to, otherwise meet the requirements of this regulation. And then I just wanted to focus on the fact that, as mentioned towards the end of Craig's presentation, there are recording and reporting requirements. They did begin as of April 1st of this year. The CARB has put out a reporting system called TRUCS, or TRUCRS. It is, and there have been plenty of presentations and recordings that kind of help walk through an entity or individual how to utilize the system. And this reporting requirement will extend until 2045. There's also a retention of records component to the regulation. Records have to be maintained for at least 5 years, and they need to be provided. They have to be available to be provided upon request if CARB makes such a request. So record retention is definitely a component that needs to be complied with. And the websites do articulate, and the regulations articulate the type of information that will be required when reporting. And this also includes, components of when you're adding to your fleet or removing to your fleet. And there, starting, a regulation was adopted at October, it went into effect in October, but reporting started this, as of April, or was due April 1st. But penalties are associated with non-compliance, and those will begin January 1st, 2025. And basically, it's the failure to submit any information or knowingly providing false information. We note that as part of this regulation, CARB does have their employees and agents do have the right to enter to verify compliance. So it's not just reporting requirements and submission online. It is subject to actual verification. So I wanted to just, I know we have other speakers, so I wanted to, and I really appreciate Craig's comprehensive summary, because it was really helpful and it's nice to know from the source. So I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Thanks, Suparna. Hi, I'm Dave Bolderoff with LA County Sanitation Districts. I'm the fleet manager with this agency. And I'm going to talk today about what our agency has done as an early adopter in alternative fuels, and in particular electrification with this new zero emission requirement with advanced clean fleets. Just to back up a little bit and set the stage here, back in the early 2000s, South Coast Air Quality Management District introduced the Clean Fleets Program, which included Rule 1196 for public fleets requiring the purchase of alternative fuels. Back then there was a lot of naysayers that this would never work. However, our agency was trialing CNG vehicles with renewable natural gas back in the kind of mid-90s. So, we were an early adopter back then. And to us, it really made sense because we were a producer of, RNG through our landfills as well as wastewater treatment plants. So it really kind of worked well with our particular agency. And we're kind of seeing that similar with the transition to electrification. There's a lot of naysayers out there that saying ACF won't work, whereas we're saying, you know, it can work. We're also a big producer of renewable electricity through biogas, so it's a good synergy for us as well. But I mean, that being said, there was a lot of technical challenges with 1196 and conversion to RNG or CNG powered vehicles. You know, pictured here is one of our vacuum jetter trucks responding to emergency sewer overflow. You know, we also call these combo trucks, and we were still applying for TICRs, you know, which is in the form of an exemption well through into 2011. I think our last one was approved for these particular types of trucks, because there was some very technical challenges on getting the fuel system and all those other components around the fuel system and making this truck work. So it wasn't until 2015, which was some 13 years after that regulation was implemented, that we started converting this type of truck, a Class 8 truck, over to RNG. But, you know, and there was a lot of concerns on, you know, responding to emergencies and being able to get a reliable source of fuel. But with all the infrastructure that we've installed over the years, it's, you know, considered acceptable today. And, you know, in 2024, a complete fleet of vacuum jetter trucks or combo trucks is, you know, running on RNG today. And pictured here is a recent sewer overflow off the 110 freeway in the city of Coruscant, with our truck responding, you know, around the clock to this particular sewer overflow. So it does work, and we're going to see, you know, how we can transition that to, you know, electric in the near future. But like with CNG, this particular truck is not going to be the first truck that we transition to, you know, electric. You know, we're big and pro still on RNG, but we really like the concept of electric and the efficiency of some of those powertrains and electrical components, or electrical drive systems. So just to back up a little bit, this is our fleet composition at LA County Sanitation Districts. We've got about 1,100 fleet assets. 685 of those are in the on-road space. Replacement value is about 140 million. And this kind of just breaks it down a little bit into the fleet classes. You know, we've got about 190 in the passenger vehicle class, 187 in the light duty class, and then 249 and 59 in the medium and heavy duty class. So we've got a little over 300 trucks that ACF will govern. And you can see that we've already implemented 20 EVs in that medium duty class, you know, prior to last year or prior to this year. So we've already kind of got ahead of the game with ACF, and we started implementing this electric technology. We actually, to back it up, we actually started in 2018 implementing electric vehicles, particularly on the passenger vehicle side. And we're already at 56% of our fleet is EV on that particular fleet class. And we're projecting within the next 5 years, you know, all our passenger vehicles will be, you know, electric, and you know, up to 40% of our medium duty vehicles will be electric as well. Just to look at ACF and what our medium heavy duty class was looking like, we're projecting, you know, within the next 10 years, we should reach a status of 80% of our medium heavy duty trucks to be zero emission. So that's 10 years out. We expect to achieve that 80%, but that last 20% going from 80 to 100%, we expect that to take another 10 years. And why is that? That is because our fleet composition and how we use particular trucks, it may not make sense to transition those, or there's a long life cycle. Long life cycles, 20 plus years on some of these rather expensive or emergency response type trucks. Now, just to kind of show you and give you a look at what we're doing to implement this type of technology. First up here is a Ford Transit or E-Transit cargo van that we've implemented in the fleet last year. These are readily available, short lead times. You know, price-wise, there's HVIP state funding available, $7,500, and then at a federal level through IRA, you can get a $7,500 tax rebate as well, even for government agencies that do not pay tax. So you can get $15,000 off the sticker price. that brings this vehicle, including sales tax, below $40,000, which is, equivalent to a, gasoline powered vehicle or cargo van. The gross vehicle weight rating on this particular van is 9,500 pounds. It's got a 68 kilowatt battery, and driving range could be somewhere in the range of 126 to 159 miles. We don't have a lot of these cargo vans in our fleet. We're particularly more truck based, and a lot of service body trucks to help support our sewer maintenance as well as facility maintenance at all our facilities. So we've got a lot of service body trucks. Ford also offer that same e-Transit in a chassis cab configuration, same gross vehicle weight rating of 9,500 pounds, which puts it in that 2B class. This particular truck is kind of a stake bed truck with a lift gate on the back of it. It has a couple of storage cabinets on it. With that extra weight of the body on it, you could still carry roughly about 3,000 pounds. What we're seeing, some of the issues with these EVs and putting service bodies on it is the battery pack protrudes out where you typically put a utility body. So we're having to work with body upfitters to redesign and build new bodies around the battery packs or guarding around the battery packs. So there's some challenges there. Everything takes a little bit longer. And also with the added weight here, you may be looking at about 100-mile range. When you first mention 100-mile range to a lot of people, they say that would never work. But for our particular circumstances, a lot of vehicles only would do 20 to 30 miles per day, short range. So 100 miles is more than enough for a lot of our applications. Not all of our applications, but a lot of our applications. And then on the heavy duty side, it was actually 2 weeks ago, we received our first Class 8 truck. This is a Kenworth T680. We've got 5 of these on order. We should have received the remainder of that order this month. 3 of those would be in a vocational application with a hook lift body, we're calling it, on the back of it. This one particular one has a dump body on top of the hook lift body. So in essence, it's a dump truck. We've got other ones that would be a water truck. And what's unique about this, I think it'd be one of the first dump trucks, within the country. And, we're seeing a lot of Class 8s hitting the roads, particularly here in California, but a lot of these are just truck tractors designed for drayage. These particular trucks that we ordered and why we went with Kenworth is because they have an ePTO. So basically we need to run auxiliary functions on these trucks, the hydraulics, to operate this vocational style truck. So these ones took a little bit longer to build. We actually ordered these back in 2021. So they're about 2.5 years to receive these trucks from state of order. So there was a lot of technical complications on building these bodies, but we're starting to receive those now. To put it in perspective, the capital cost, out the door, it was about $476,000 for this particular truck. We're able to receive $240,000 in funding. So $200,000 of those was from a AQMD grant, and then there's $40,000 available through the federal government through that tax credit. So a net cost would be about $236,000, which is comparable to a diesel or a natural gas equivalent. On this particular truck, there's about a 400 kilowatt hour battery, and the range could be somewhere in between 100 to 150 miles, which would meet a lot of our applications for, particular use around a plant or, shorter haul distance. To get all this vehicles and infrastructure out there, the vehicles implemented into our fleet, we really need the charging infrastructure. We started investing in charging infrastructure in 2018 to support our light duty fleet. So we had a lot of experience, gained a lot of experience over the last 6 years on what works, what doesn't work, how to streamline some of these projects. And what we've really kind of learned, there's 2 types of EV charging. You've got level 2 AC charging, and then you've got level 3, or commonly referred to as DC fast charging. And what we really kind of say is, level 2 charging is really good for smaller vehicles or even medium duty vehicles with maybe 100 kilowatt or lower size batteries that are domiciled at a facility and parked overnight that have a large dwell time to charge. Level 2 would work very well. It's a lower cost to install that hardware. Pictured here is a level 3 charger, DC fast charger rated at 180 kilowatt. And really what we need DC fast chargers for is really to support our roving crews or staff attending meetings at facilities. So we need to have these strategically placed at our facilities. So, people can travel between facilities, or the further outlying facilities have got that opportune charge time, and particularly with heavy duties as well. With bigger battery packs of 400 kilowatts or 400 kilowatt hours, we need the bigger chargers to support that fleet. But as we kind of delved into it, it's kind of a complicated scenario. Everyone asks, well, how many chargers per vehicle do you need? It's not always a simple question there. You've really got to look at a number of different factors to identify how many chargers per vehicle you need. Some of those factors include, utilization and miles driven per day, week, or month. Is that vehicle parked at a facility overnight, or is it a take-home type vehicle? And then percentage of those vehicles that are, parked at a facility versus, take-home or roving. And then ultimately, what is that dwell time that a vehicle has to charge, if that's during the shift as well as after the shift. Okay, EV charging ports. This is kind of a snapshot of where we were last year. We had 117 in the ground. Predominantly, most of those were level 2. And this is our projection over the next 5 years. We expect to 4x that and get to 460 ports over the next 5 years, to support our requirement for all these new EVs that we're adding in there. So these will be at a number of our facilities located across the LA County. Like I said, 6 years ago, we started this transition to electrification, particularly on the light duty side. And we've worked very closely with our local utility, SCE. SCE have this Charge Ready program. We've participated in 6 projects with SCE on this Charge Ready program. It's been very successful for us to kind of keep that infrastructure cost low, almost sometimes zero cost to install some of these charging projects. This particular picture is at one of our dispatch and maintenance facilities that was just finished last month. This was the first under the Charge Ready Transport program, which is specifically designed for medium and heavy duty trucks. SCE came in there, planned the project, did all the design, and actually put all the behind the hardware infrastructure in place. So that's installing things like the transformer, the switchgear, the panels, the step-down transformer, getting everything ready for us to come back and put the actual chargers themselves and install that. So the cost to install the hardware, this particular station had 2 ABB Terra 184 chargers pictured here in the center, a ABB wall box unit pictured to the left, and then 2 AC chargers that are 70 amps pictured to the right. So the cost of those 7 ports were approximately $190,000 for hardware and installation. And subsequent to that, we were able to receive a AQMD grant under the CAFM infrastructure program for 50% of that cost. So out the door, we had all of this infrastructure installed for less than $100,000. That particular project took well over 2 years to complete from start to finish, and a lot of that was due to delays with electrical components, long lead times we're still seeing on switchgear particularly, and some degree transformers. So in the meantime, we've purchased a number of these battery energy storage systems, commonly referred to as BESS. This particular unit that we have is, we purchased 3 of these late last year. It's a 600 kilowatt storage on a trailer. And basically you can kind of set these up for temporary EV charging of vehicles as well, which is a very good way of supporting infrastructure while you're building permanent infrastructure, I should say. These are currently under the core funding program, and we're able to purchase 3 of these and get that core funding. The cost of these particular trailers is in the $300,000 range, and core funding is somewhere in the range of about $240,000 and maybe even higher if you're in a disadvantaged community. So there is some good funding available to get these particular battery storage units for temporary charging or even backup power facilities in service. And then finally, not only on the on-road side, but even on the off-road side, we're really looking to implement electrification into our fleet. So over the past year, we've added 10 pieces of heavy equipment, and particularly these wheel loaders seem to be a good fit for our operations where electrification, there is companies out there that are selling these wheel loaders that are full electric. And we're using some of the same infrastructure that we're using for the on-road side to charge these. So we're not having to add too much more infrastructure. So we're investing big on the off-road space as well.
So good afternoon. I run the fleet and electrification business for Matrix Consulting Group. And I'll be presenting today with my colleague, David Branch. And we've grown a significant fleet sustainability practice over the past couple of years. And we've developed a 10-step process to assist organizations in their journey. And what this offers to fleets that are far less mature in their approach to electrification than what David has just presented to us is it provides realistically a place to start and how you can bite off this extremely complex transition in manageable pieces. We heard today excellent presentations about the regulatory environment, about the legal environment, and practical steps from a fleet who's really doing some amazing things. And I've learned a lot already today of interesting tidbits from the other presenters. So what we were hearing a lot in our journeys as fleet consultants is organizations that didn't know where to start. It didn't even know when to start. You know, is it way too early to start on transitioning a fleet to electrification? And clearly that's not the case. But in practical terms, how does an organization with very limited resources to dedicate to this actually go down the road to electrification? So this is meant as a roadmap for them. And David and I are going to go back and forth in discussing these 10 steps. And David, do you want to just talk about step 1, creating the inventory?
Sure, thank you. The initial step, and this is an important foundational piece for making any kind of fleet transition, like electrification, is having a really clear grasp of the current fleet inventory. And while a lot of sophisticated advanced fleets have this kind of information contained in their fleet management information system, there are some fleets, perhaps even some special districts in California and elsewhere, that need to work on this a little bit, that maybe don't have all this information in one place. When you're talking about changing the composition of the fleet and the fuel source, there's a lot more than just the vehicle serial number and age. There's a lot of factors that should be compiled in an initial inventory, where they're housed, their average mileage, frequency of use, things like that. Beginning at this point and developing a really strong data foundation is going to be crucial for the subsequent steps.
Thanks, David. So we help a lot of fleets get an inventory together, or, and then they say, okay, let's electrify the fleet. Well, in truth, we don't recommend organizations to electrify their current inventory because quite often, and in fact, almost in every case, organizations are overfleeted. They have excess of, on average, 20% of vehicles, usually older vehicles that have been retained after replacement. So they have these shadow fleets. They also have vehicles that are not the right type for the job. So vehicles that are either underpowered or overpowered for the use case that is their daily function. So what we do is we have a methodology and we start with that inventory, and then we interview vehicle users on every asset in a fleet. And come up with dispositions, and those dispositions could be retain, keep the current unit, it's the right type for the job, and just replace it at the end of its life cycle. Replace, that's usually for aged units that are outside of their life cycle, replace it with a like asset. Right type, we identify the correct vehicle for the job and tell them when it should be replaced. Eliminate, got to go away. And then the last category is where we get into creating motor pools, sharing assets, and identifying those assets that are ideal for electrification. So once this is done, we have a rationalized fleet, and then we're ready for
taking a look at the market. That step that Kate introduced is really important because that helps a fleet manager identify the functional needs, the use cases that their fleet has to be able to handle. And so with that information in hand, you can take a look at the EV market for each classification of vehicle in your fleet and each use case, and identify whether there are options out there that are able to meet that need. There are many zero emission options out there, and the number continues to grow, and the capabilities continue to increase. A lot of fleets already could use zero emission vehicles to replace probably the majority of their light duty fleet, particularly those that are housed at the same place every night, that don't travel more than 100 miles a day. Those are obvious candidates. And then as the market matures for those larger vehicles, those class 3, 4, and above, keeping an eye on those is important because you can match those to the use cases in your fleet with the information that you've gathered through a utilization review. One of the prior, I think Craig's presentation, he noted the dozens of different options that are out there for each classification. I think that's a useful resource that he presented. There's also driveevfleets.org, which maintains kind of a running compendium of available EV options. So there are plenty of resources out there, and this step is really valuable once you've got a firm grasp on your fleet needs.
So now you've got a rationalized fleet. Now you've reviewed the market and you can see where there's matches. So this is where we can identify candidates for electrification. The easy candidates are, of course, the light duty fleet because there's a lot available right now. So, you know, in most fleets, sedans, SUVs, pickups, and even vans that go home at night or have somewhere, not to people's homes, go back to the yard at night and have ample time to charge between shifts are ideal candidates. Obviously, we have to be very forward-looking in the medium duty and heavy duty options. And again, we thank Craig for pulling that out, and the importance of that is really clear. So right now we're asking, do we have time to charge it between shifts? And does it have to go beyond the range of available EV options? And if the answer to both of that is no, then, you know, this is a candidate for electrification.
The next step is outlining what your replacement plan will look like. And this requires some finesse because, as Kate mentioned, a lot of fleets require some updating. There are usually many units in a fleet that are past their recommended replacement life cycle. And to try and replace all of them in the first year to get everything back up to cycle would result in this giant spike that you see here in the example in year one, which isn't feasible because spending that much money in 1 year is typically not something that's on the table. It's logistically too difficult. It results in these big spikes later on when all of those vehicles come due for replacement at the same time. So by taking your adjusted fleet composition after identifying those that should be right sized, right typed, eliminated, and the replacement cycle that you're trying to use, you can level these out and take a more gradual approach to bringing vehicles up to cycle. And that saves money. It helps you kind of replace vehicles at the point when the total cost of ownership is minimized. And it also provides the basis for determining when to transition particular classifications to zero emissions. So that's what the next slide looks like. When you've got your replacement plan leveled out and projected for the coming years, you can identify which classifications you're going to transition to zero emission vehicles. The CARB regulations obviously are the driving force for this in California. And this is something that we've helped special districts do here in Southern California, navigate their replacement to align with the CARB standards, with the Advanced Clean Fleet Directive, and figuring out which classifications, how many of them need to be electrified in the given year. This replacement plan, this strategy is based on the prior steps, clearly understanding your fleet, understanding the market that's out there, and the timing for replacement cycles.
So of course you don't wait till step 6 to start planning for your infrastructure, but there's certain things you need to know. So you do need to know what levels of chargers you're going to need, at what locations, and kind of when the vehicles are going to be there. And then that charging infrastructure has to be in place before those vehicles arrive. And I liked what the other David said about having already a plan as he moves forward with the electrification of his fleet from 117 chargers to 462. So you do have to, as you know, the previous slide showed the electrification plan. Well, the charging plan is just as important to model that growth. And 2 other things to consider here is, of course, your electric utility provider must be involved intimately in your charging plan. And we highly encourage organizations to have charging management software. So you know exactly what the charging levels are of vehicles that are being charged, and you can move vehicles on and off chargers as need be. Dave's now going to talk about shop and training needs.
Thank you. Yeah, to the extent that maintenance of zero emission vehicles is going to be done in-house at the shop, there's some adaptations that should be made to accommodate that. So the preventive maintenance cycles are a lot different for EVs than they are for internal combustion engines. So programming that into your preventive maintenance plan is really important to make sure that they're getting the PMs that they need, but not more than they need. Energy tracking is also an essential piece of this. One of the big reasons for electrification, obviously, is energy savings. Fleet telematics help a lot with collecting that information, and to the degree that you can collect that from charging stations and draw a comparison to fuel consumption and carbon emissions from internal combustion engines, that data is really valuable. So configuring your shop and fleet operations to capture that data is important. And then there are practical matters like the tools and equipment at the shop, high voltage gloves, insulated tools, preparing technicians to work on zero emission vehicles effectively and safely. That also means training them. So in the procurement of zero emission vehicles, joining cooperative purchasing agreements, making sure that there are training requirements that are part of that, so that not only do you receive those vehicles, but you receive some training for staff on maintaining and repairing them. And of course, there are plenty of partners, professional organizations out there who offer training. So being aware of that market to find cost-effective training for technicians is another important step.
And our last 2 steps involve the education of employees and then measuring success. So educating employees is critical. Many people in the organization will have preconceptions about electric vehicles, positive or negative, but still others have very little knowledge about them. So things like a complete communication strategy with a website to communicate initiatives, as well as things like ride and drives and town halls are all important steps in making sure that all your employees are on board. And then the last step is, of course, implement all these programs, but measure the success. And so to do that, you need a performance measurement framework in place ahead of time. Again, telematics is key in doing that. And one of the things that you're going to want to measure is have some baselines and measure your greenhouse gas emissions reductions as a result of all this great work. And part of this performance measurement framework involves the reporting requirements that Suparna described earlier. So you're going to want to include that in your planning for success as well. So those conclude the 10-step practical process of actually electrifying a fleet. It does seem like a lot. It is a lot. And there's a lot of uncertainties and a lot of growth and constant changes out there. But when approached one bite at a time with supportive stakeholders, like some of the people you've heard from on the call, this is all doable. We've successfully worked with more than a dozen organizations, mostly in California and Washington, to do various parts of this transition. And it's getting, through refining these steps, it's getting better and better. So the first point I made about when is the time to start, well, I guess the time to start was yesterday, because these regulatory requirements are real. Climate change is real, and anything that we can do to move towards a more sustainable fleet is a really important contribution to the industry.
Thank you so much to all of you. Actually, it's been a wonderful presentation, comprehensive on the topic. Dave B. That picture you showed at the beginning brings back memories. As I was on the board of the Sanitation District at the time, 5th District and South Bay, and that sewage spillage caused quite a bit of ruckus, but Robert Ferrante's team and the entire Sanitation District did such a great job in remedying it. There's a couple of questions that come up that I want to ask you all about, and this may go more towards those that talk about the regulation aspect, and we're going to hear more about funding, resources, etc. later. But I am a fully EV fleet at home. Both my wife and I drive electric vehicles at this point, and to us, and apparently to the first question, what concerns us the most is, frankly, the issue of outages. And the first question is about what about those agencies with snow climate or other climate where they have outages, and they may not have enough possibility to actually charge their vehicles. I think one answer was given by Dave, where they purchased all these trailers, but I'd like to hear more about one of you, how to address that issue.
Yeah, Frank, this is Craig. I can at least set the stage a little bit. So we do know that the grid is becoming more resilient year after year, and there are, we do realize that fleets are probably going to have to develop some type of a backup generation system in those rare events. Also, maybe having a battery backup would be helpful. Also, we do know that there are some districts that have mutual aid agreements with neighboring districts, neighboring like a partnership. If you have a mutual aid agreement, you are allowed to maintain at least up to 25% of your fleet as combustion vehicles to deal with those emergencies and those events. So, there is flexibility built into the regulation to address a lot of the concerns that fleets have.
Thank you, Craig. And maybe a follow-up to that, Craig, while you're here. The other question actually related to cost. The other question related to the increase of cost, of course, all of these regulations. And given that some districts under Proposition 218 may not be able to pass through ratepayers some of these costs, what provisions might there be in order to assist some of these districts for funding purposes and to be able to pay for some of these requirements that the state is coming up with?
Yeah, and I don't know all of the funding programs that are out there, but I know there's several. I know the state has some funding programs. We do at CARB and other state agencies, even funding programs for infrastructure, as David talked about. There's also your local air district might have some funding opportunities, and even the federal government, right? The federal government has funding opportunities available. So it's out there. You have to seek it out, but it's there. Also, just want to throw out there, we have developed a Cal Fleet Advisor program at CARB. And if you have questions about funding, if you have questions about where are these zero emission trucks, or where do I start installing infrastructure, you can get one-on-one consultation through the Cal Fleet Advisor program. And I don't know the website exactly, but if you go to the Advanced Clean Fleets website, we should have a link to the Cal Fleet Advisor program. It's a one-on-one consultation that will provide some help with navigating this web of funding programs and requirements.
Thank you, Craig. We're going to jump into our next panel at this point. There's hoping that the next question, although it's out there, might be answered as well. And that is, of course, again, for some rural areas, what is the possibilities of having more infrastructures, so to speak? And if any of the panelists can see that question, feel free to put it in the answer to the question as well, while we turn to Chris at this point for the next presentation.